When it comes to relationships, one of the most misunderstood concepts is the idea of self-respect. People often think self-respect is just a word, something abstract, or maybe even an attitude you can fake. But in reality, self-respect is the cornerstone of attraction and influence. If you don't respect yourself, it's impossible for anyone else to value you the way you deserve. And when it comes to pulling back in a relationship, showing that self-respect is what makes a man start noticing, start thinking, and eventually start obsessing over the connection he may have taken for granted. Self-respect is magnetic because it communicates one fundamental truth. You know your worth, and you will not settle for less than what you deserve. Most people make the mistake of believing that constant availability and eagerness prove love or commitment. They text immediately, respond to every call, rearrange their schedules to fit someone else, and go above and beyond to accommodate desires that may not be reciprocated. At first glance, this might seem like dedication, but in reality, it erodes your self-respect. When you allow yourself to be treated as an option, you signal to others that your presence is easily replaceable. And let me tell you, no one obsesses over someone they consider replaceable. Obsession grows from desire, and desire grows from recognition of value. If you respect yourself, you automatically raise your perceived value in the eyes of others. Self-respect is about more than just saying no or refusing to be walked over. It's about setting boundaries in a way that is clear, consistent, and unapologetic. It's about living your life fully and unapologetically without depending on someone else to define your happiness or worth. When a man sees a woman who respects herself, who does not allow her emotions or attention to be taken for granted, he notices it immediately. He senses it in the way she carries herself, in the way she speaks, and in the way she prioritizes her own life. And the most interesting part is that he doesn't just notice it. He begins to think about it constantly. He begins to ask himself why he didn't appreciate this before, why he took her presence for granted, and why she seems so effortlessly in control of her own life. One of the keys to demonstrating self-respect is understanding that your time, energy, and emotional investment are not unlimited resources to be given away freely. They are precious commodities, and you must protect them. If a man expects immediate responses, constant attention, or unconditional availability, you have the power to gently pull back. This is not punishment. It's simply recognition that your life exists outside of him, and that your happiness and fulfillment are not dependent on his approval or attention. When you pull back in this way, you create space for reflection. Suddenly, your absence is felt. Suddenly, the very presence he once overlooked becomes a source of curiosity and desire. This is the essence of self-respect being magnetic. It works because it is authentic, it is rooted in truth, and it communicates value without needing to manipulate or coerce. Many women are afraid that setting boundaries or pulling back will push a man away permanently. But the reality is the opposite. When you respect yourself and demonstrate that your presence is valuable, you create a standard that cannot be ignored. A man who is genuinely interested and emotionally capable will rise to meet that standard. He will begin to appreciate what he had, reflect on the moments he may have taken for granted, and recognize the unique qualities that make you extraordinary. Self-respect is not about creating distance as a game. It is about creating awareness, understanding, and recognition. It is about allowing him to see what he could lose if he does not prioritize you and your worth. Showing self-respect also means prioritizing your goals, passions, and personal growth. A woman who is fully engaged in her own life, her career, her hobbies, her friendships, and her self-development projects confidence and independence. She's not dependent on a man to feel complete, and this independence is irresistible. It sends a subtle but powerful message. I am complete on my own. And if you want to be part of my life, you must meet me as an equal, not as someone to be carried or managed. This mindset shifts the power dynamic in the relationship in a natural way. When a man sees that a woman does not revolve around him, He begins to notice the value of her attention. He begins to crave her presence because it is no longer guaranteed. This is where the beginnings of obsession take root, not in a toxic way, but as a natural consequence of recognizing what is valuable and rare. Another aspect of self-respect is emotional regulation. Women often fall into the trap of reacting impulsively when a man ignores them, cancels plans, or fails to meet expectations. Reactivity may seem like passion or care, but in truth, it diminishes your worth in his eyes. Emotional self-control, on the other hand, demonstrates that your sense of self is intact regardless of his behavior. It communicates maturity, stability, and strength qualities that are deeply attractive and difficult to forget. When a man observes that you are steady, composed, and self-reliant, he begins to recognize that he is dealing with someone extraordinary. He begins to reflect on his own behavior and the value of your presence in ways he never did before. Self-respect also manifests in the way you communicate. When you speak, your words carry weight. You are not desperate for validation or approval. You express your needs, boundaries, and expectations clearly and calmly. You do not overexplain or justify yourself unnecessarily. This clarity communicates strength and confidence, which are highly magnetic traits. Men are naturally drawn to women who are confident in themselves because confidence signals security, intelligence, and independence. When a man sees a woman who knows what she wants and will not settle for less, he is compelled to pay attention. He is compelled to reflect, to value, and eventually to obsess over the connection he almost let slip away. The power of self-respect is subtle, but it is incredibly effective. It does not require manipulation, games, or deception. It is simply the act of valuing yourself, protecting your energy, and prioritizing your life in a way that naturally draws attention and respect. A woman who respects herself does not beg for attention or validation. She does not chase. She simply exists fully, authentically, and confidently. And when a man realizes that he cannot take her presence for granted, he begins to think about her constantly. He begins to recognize that he has been given a rare gift, one that is not easily replaced, and he starts to obsess over the potential loss. Ultimately, self-respect is the foundation of all healthy attraction. When you pull back in the right way, it is not about playing a game. It is about demonstrating the value of your presence, your time, and your love. It is about living authentically and refusing to compromise your worth for temporary attention. It is about creating a life so full, so rich, and so magnetic that he cannot help but notice, reflect, and yes, eventually obsess over the woman who knows her worth and refuses to settle for anything less. When you embody self-respect, you are no longer available to be taken for granted. You are no longer easily forgotten. You become the woman who commands attention, respect, and desire, not because you demand it, but because your presence radiates value in a way that cannot be ignored. Timing and method are everything when it comes to pulling back in a relationship. Many people think that creating desire is just about distance, or that withdrawing suddenly will automatically make someone chase them. That's not true. If you pull away the wrong way, you can push a man away permanently. And if you pull back the right way, you create an atmosphere of curiosity, reflection, and desire that can make him start obsessing over the connection he might have taken for granted. Understanding the timing and the method is not a trick. It's about emotional intelligence, awareness, and self-control. And it requires paying attention to the dynamics of your relationship, the personality of the man involved, and your own intentions. Pulling back too abruptly is one of the biggest mistakes women make. If you suddenly stop responding to messages, cancel plans, or act cold without explanation, it can feel like rejection rather than self-respect. The man may feel confused, hurt, or even resentful. And instead of reflecting on his feelings, he may disengage entirely, The right way to pull back is gradual and measured. It's about creating subtle shifts in your availability and attention without cutting him off completely or punishing him. For example, if he usually expects immediate responses, start responding with a little delay. If you always rearrange your schedule to see him, maintain your plans and politely decline when necessary. These small adjustments create a sense of absence without creating hostility or confusion, and this absence is what triggers reflection. Timing also matters in terms of the emotional context. You can't pull back in the middle of an argument or when emotions are running high. Doing so can be interpreted as abandonment or disinterest, which may damage the connection. The ideal time to pull back is when interactions are calm, positive, or neutral. When a man experiences your absence during a period of normalcy, he has the mental and emotional space to process it, reflect on what your presence adds to his life, and recognize the value he may be overlooking. Timing your pullback strategically ensures that your absence is noticed in a way that stimulates longing rather than frustration. Method is equally important. Pulling back should never be about manipulation or punishment. It should be rooted in self-respect and authenticity. The goal is not to make him suffer or to force him into submission. The goal is to create awareness of your value and to allow him to see what he risks losing if he does not prioritize the relationship. For instance, if he texts you constantly throughout the day, you might gradually reduce the frequency of your responses while maintaining warmth and respect in the messages you do send. You might also invest more time in your hobbies, friendships, or personal goals, making your life visibly full and engaging. This method communicates that your happiness is not dependent on him and that your time is precious, which naturally draws attention and interest. It's also important to consider the balance between presence and absence. Pulling back too much can create distance that feels like disinterest, while pulling back too little may not create the space needed for reflection. The key is to find a rhythm that shows independence without creating a sense of abandonment. For example, if you normally see him 3 times a week, consider reducing it to 2, while keeping those interactions high quality, engaging, and positive. If you normally respond immediately to his texts, introduce a small delay that is consistent and predictable, showing that you have a life outside of the relationship. These subtle adjustments in timing and method create a natural curiosity and awareness, which is often what triggers a man to start thinking more deeply about the relationship and your presence in his life. Another factor in timing and method is emotional pacing. Human beings respond strongly to contrast and patterns. When someone is always available, their presence becomes normal and their absence is barely noticed. When someone is selectively present, their presence gains weight and their absence carries meaning. This is why methodical and thoughtful pullback works so well. You are not creating drama or playing games. You are creating patterns that allow him to recognize the emotional value of your presence. He begins to notice the small details. He may have overlooked the way you make him laugh, the comfort you provide, the excitement you bring. And when he notices those things in your absence, he begins to dwell on them. The method also includes how you communicate during this period of pullback. You do not need to announce it or justify it extensively. Simply being consistent in your actions is enough. If you start responding selectively, stay consistent with that pattern. If you maintain boundaries about your time, uphold them without wavering. The consistency of your behavior signals stability and self-respect, which are highly attractive traits. Men are drawn to women who are confident in their decisions, clear in their boundaries, and unwavering in their values. When your method is consistent, he begins to connect the dots between your actions and your worth, leading him to reflect and eventually to obsess over the connection he may have underestimated. Timing and method also work together to build anticipation. Anticipation is one of the most powerful triggers of desire. When a man cannot predict your availability completely, but sees that your attention is not given lightly, he begins to value it more. This anticipation is not about making him wait unnecessarily. It's about showing that your presence is a gift, not a guarantee. By carefully managing the timing of your interactions and the method of your communication, you create an environment where his mind naturally dwells on you, and he starts to prioritize thinking about you because he senses the emotional and relational stakes involved. Finally, understanding timing and method requires awareness of your own intentions. If your goal is to create obsession, it cannot come from a place of insecurity, jealousy, or revenge. It must come from a place of self-respect, empowerment, and emotional intelligence. When you act with clarity and intention, your timing and method will naturally align to create curiosity, desire, and emotional engagement in a way that is authentic and compelling. The right timing, paired with the right method, allows a man to see not only your value, but also the value of being present in a relationship with someone who is confident, independent, and self-aware. It allows him to reflect, appreciate, and ultimately become emotionally invested in a way that is deep and lasting. Timing and method are not tricks. They are strategies rooted in respect, clarity, and authenticity. When executed properly, they allow a man to see your worth, experience your absence as meaningful, and reflect on the connection he may have taken for granted. It is this careful balance, knowing when to step back, how to create presence and absence, and how to communicate consistently, that triggers the kind of reflection and emotional response that leads to genuine interest, attention, and eventual obsession. The art of pulling back is not about scarcity. It is about timing, method, and the intentional projection of value and self-respect that naturally draws someone toward you in thought, reflection, and desire. Obsessing in a relationship doesn't happen overnight, and it rarely happens through force or manipulation. Real obsession occurs when a man is given the opportunity to reflect on what he has, what he's losing, and what he almost let slip away. Reflection is a natural process that occurs when absence or distance is introduced in a meaningful way. When a woman pulls back strategically, not as a punishment, but as a demonstration of self-respect and independence, it allows him to process his feelings, evaluate his priorities, and notice what he might have taken for granted. This reflection is what sparks the deep, consuming thoughts that lead to emotional obsession. It's important to understand that obsession in this context is not unhealthy or toxic. It's the result of a man fully realizing the value and uniqueness of a connection he may have underestimated. Reflection begins with awareness. When a man notices a woman is not as available or as attentive as before, he is prompted to ask himself questions. Why isn't she responding the way she used to? Why does she seem more focused on her own life? Why am I noticing her absence more than I expected? These questions are the starting point of reflection, and reflection is the seed of desire. It forces him to dig into his own behavior and recognize the ways he may have taken her for granted. Often, people only fully appreciate what they risk losing when it's no longer constantly in front of them. Absence creates perspective, and perspective leads to understanding and eventually obsession. Reflection also happens when he starts comparing past interactions with current circumstances. When he remembers the way she laughed, the way she listened, the way she made him feel alive, the contrast between past presence and current absence becomes evident. This contrast creates a sense of longing. He begins to replay memories, analyze conversations, and consider the emotional and psychological impact she has had on his life. This mental replay is what intensifies thoughts of her and amplifies the emotional connection. The key is that reflection is not forced. It is natural. It occurs because her absence is felt in a meaningful and noticeable way. The deeper the connection was before the pullback, the stronger the reflection will be, and the more likely it is that he will start to obsess over her presence. Obsessing with reflection is also influenced by the woman's authenticity during the process. If she pulls back in a way that is genuine, consistent, and aligned with her self-respect, the man's reflection is more profound. He doesn't see it as a game or manipulation. He sees it as a change in dynamics that forces him to think about her value in his life. He begins to question his own actions, recognize missed opportunities, and understand the emotional significance she holds. This is why pulling back in a manipulative or inconsistent way rarely works. Obsession born from confusion or resentment is not the same as obsession born from genuine reflection. The goal is for him to recognize what he is truly missing and what he truly values, not to create anxiety or frustration. Another factor in reflection is the emotional space that distance provides. When someone is constantly available, their presence becomes background noise. It's easy to overlook small acts of care, kindness, and attention when they are always present. Pulling back creates emotional space that allows a man to notice the little things, the way she made him feel supported, the way she showed affection, the way she inspired him to be better. In that space, he can reflect without distraction and allow the memories of her impact to surface naturally. It's the absence that highlights the presence, and in that clarity, obsession begins to grow. Reflection also engages the imagination. When he starts thinking about her in her absence, he fills in the gaps with possibilities. He imagines moments they could share, experiences they might have, and the joy of her presence. This mental visualization makes the emotional connection more vivid and personal. The mind naturally exaggerates the positive aspects of something it fears losing, which is why reflection is so powerful in generating emotional obsession. He begins to attach emotional weight to her presence, and that weight creates a strong pull that is difficult to ignore. Timing is critical in the reflection process. If a woman pulls back too early or too abruptly, the reflection may be superficial or negative, focused on confusion or frustration rather than desire and appreciation. But if she pulls back after a foundation of positive interactions and connection has been established, reflection is deep and meaningful. He recalls shared laughter, trust, intimacy, and emotional support. And he begins to realize the significance of what he is missing. Reflection becomes a mirror, showing him both the value of her presence and the potential consequences of losing it. Reflection also forces him to examine his own behavior. When he notices her absence, he evaluates what he has contributed and what he may have neglected. He begins to take responsibility for his actions or inactions, and this self-examination intensifies his thoughts of her. He may realize did he express enough appreciation, did he invest enough time, or did he prioritize the relationship in the way he should have. This awareness increases the emotional pull because he recognizes the rarity and value of someone who treated him with care, love, and respect. The more he reflects, the more he dwells on her presence, and this is what transforms attention into obsession. Reflection also brings emotional clarity. In the absence of distraction and constant interaction, he starts to differentiate between superficial attraction and genuine emotional connection. He recognizes that her presence was not just convenient or comfortable, but deeply meaningful and fulfilling. He begins to understand the emotional depth she brought into his life, the joy she sparked, and the sense of completeness that is hard to replace. This clarity is what deepens the emotional pull and makes obsession both natural and inevitable. Lastly, reflection encourages action. Once he has internalized the value of her presence and processed the emotional significance of her absence, he begins to consider how to reconnect or prioritize the relationship. Obsession leads to motivation. He starts thinking about what he can do to maintain the connection, repair any past mistakes, or prove his investment. This is why reflection is the critical step in the process of creating desire. It allows him to feel, think, and ultimately act in a way that reinforces the connection he now sees as invaluable. Obsessing through reflection is not about creating anxiety or manipulating emotion. It is about allowing a man the mental and emotional space to recognize the depth of his feelings, the value of the connection, and the importance of presence in the relationship. When reflection is given time and space, obsession grows naturally and authentically. It occurs because he realizes the rarity of what he has, the significance of her presence, and the consequences of taking it for granted. In this way, reflection is the key mechanism through which genuine emotional obsession begins to take root. Boundaries are one of the most powerful tools in creating respect, attraction, and even obsession in a relationship. Many people confuse boundaries with manipulation, control, or emotional games, but they are not the same. Boundaries are a reflection of self-respect, clarity, and emotional intelligence. They are statements about who you are, what you value, and how you expect to be treated. When a woman sets and maintains clear boundaries, she communicates a deep sense of self-worth, which naturally draws attention and interest. This is different from manipulation, which is designed to control, deceive, or coerce someone into behaving a certain way. Boundaries are about protecting your emotional space and honoring your own needs, and they create a dynamic in which a man can start to think more deeply about you and the value of your presence. Boundaries begin with understanding yourself. You must be clear about what you will accept and what you will not. What makes you feel safe, valued, and respected. This clarity is critical because without it, boundaries become inconsistent, vague, or reactive, which can confuse the other person and diminish your credibility. When you know your worth, it is easier to establish boundaries in a way that is firm yet respectful. This could mean setting limits on how often you communicate, how much of your time is available, or how much emotional energy you invest before receiving reciprocity. The key is that these boundaries are consistent and aligned with your values, not arbitrary rules designed to manipulate or punish. Boundaries are also a form of self-care. They communicate that you prioritize your emotional and mental well-being. A man who sees a woman maintaining boundaries recognizes that she is not easily swayed by impulse or insecurity. She is not desperate for attention or validation. And she is not willing to compromise her self-respect for temporary closeness. This awareness naturally makes him more attentive because he sees that her presence is valuable and cannot be taken for granted. Boundaries create a healthy tension in the relationship, a space where both parties are encouraged to respect and appreciate each other rather than operate on automatic comfort or familiarity. Maintaining boundaries requires consistency. If a woman sets a limit but frequently